I'm Danny Brown, and you're listening to Artifacts, a storytelling podcast about technology, internet culture, media, and the feelings we still attach to them. Because sometimes the objects fade, but the feeling doesn't. There was a time when software came in boxes. Big ones. Sometimes ridiculously big ones. You'd see them lined up on a shelf in a computer store, each one promising to make your computer do something new. Create something, organise something, learn something, play something. And you stand there looking at the boxes, wondering which one was going to change your computer. And maybe in some small way, change your life. Because buying software felt like buying a thing. You took it home, you opened the box, inside was a disk, a manual, maybe a registration card. And somewhere, usually printed on a tiny piece of paper, was the most important thing of all, your product key. That little string of letters and numbers that you absolutely could not lose, because that software was yours. There's something wonderfully excessive about old software packaging. You might buy a program on a CD and receive a box big enough to suggest there was considerably more inside. But usually there wasn't. But the box made it feel important. You'd open it, take out the disc, flip through the manual, maybe skim the Getting Started guide, and then you'd put everything somewhere safe. The disc went into the computer, the manual went onto a shelf. And the box, well, that became part of the landscape of your home. It was physical evidence that you'd bought something, that you had access to something your computer hadn't been able to do before. Maybe it was a graphics program, maybe an accounting package, maybe Microsoft Office. Maybe something you just bought because you were convinced you were finally going to learn how to make the most of your computer. The software itself might disappear into the background once you'd installed it, but the box stayed. And then there was the product key. That tiny collection of letters and numbers that carried huge importance. You'd enter it during installation, click through the next few screens, wait, and eventually, there it was. The software was installed. And the key became something you needed to keep. So you'd write it down, put it in a drawer, leave it inside the manual, and stick the little registration card somewhere you were certain you'd remember. Because you knew that one day you might need it again. And losing it could mean losing access to something you'd already paid for. And that's weird to think about that now. That we used to have physical proof that software belonged to us. The box, the disc, the manual, the key. They were all little pieces of evidence. You could look at them and think, I own this. And we kept those things, even after we stopped using the software. You'd find old computer discs years later in a drawer. A box tucked away in a cupboard. A manual you hadn't opened since the computer it belonged to had long disappeared. But the funny thing was, you probably didn't need any of it anymore. The software was obsolete. The computer was gone. The operating system had changed. The product key was meaningless. But throwing it away could still feel difficult, because you weren't really keeping the software. You were keeping evidence of a time when you used it. Maybe you remember the computer it was installed on. Maybe the room it sat in. Maybe the project you created with it. Maybe the person who gave it to you. The box was just a thing that happened to survive. Today we've changed the way we think about software. You don't necessarily buy a program anymore. You subscribe. You download it. You sign in, and it appears on your computer. It's quicker, easier, and you don't need a shelf full of boxes. You don't need to keep track of disks, and you don't need to find that tiny piece of paper with the product key printed on it. And when you get a new computer, you don't need to dig through a cupboard looking for installation media. And in almost every sense, it's better this way. But something's changed. The software isn't really something you own anymore. It's something you have access to. And perhaps that's why these old boxes feel significant when you come across them. They represented a very different relationship with the things we bought. You didn't just have an account. You had a box. You had a disk. You had something you could hold. Something you could put on a shelf and say, that's mine. Maybe that's why the old software box has survived in our memories. Not because the packaging was good, and certainly not because anyone misses having to find a product key from 15 years ago. It's because the box represented permanence. You bought something, you brought it home, you installed it, and then you kept it. The software might eventually become obsolete, but for a while it was yours. And there's something comforting about that, because a physical object could carry the feeling of ownership long after the thing itself had stopped being useful. And I think that's what makes finding an old software box so different. You pick it up, and suddenly you're back in front of that old computer. Maybe you can remember the sound of it starting, the screen, the room, what you were working on, who you were back then. The box hasn't changed, but you have. And now it isn't just a box of obsolete software. It's evidence of a version of your life that no longer exists. The disk may not work. The software may be gone. The product key may mean nothing anymore. But for that moment, you get to hold it again. I'm Danny Brown, and this is Artifacts. Thanks for spending some time with Artifacts. If this episode reminded you of a memory, a feeling, or a piece of the internet you thought had disappeared, you can find more episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to help preserve the archive, visit the website for ways to support the show. Until next time, take care of the things that matter to you, even the small ones.